Welcome, everyone. We're just going to wait a minute to let folks join. Welcome, everybody. I know folks are jumping on, so we'll just wait one more minute and then we'll get started. Okay, great. Well, I know a ton of folks are still joining, but we'll just get started. We have some great speakers, as you can see on our screen. But good afternoon. My name is Kat Lyons, and I work for the Network for Landscape Conservation as the network associate. The Network for Landscape Conservation is pleased to continue our Landscape Conservation and Action webinar series into the spring and summer. I just wanted to provide a brief overview of the network, introduce our speakers very briefly so we can get listening to them and just provide some logistics before we get going. So the network launched in 2011, and the Network for Landscape Conservation is really a national umbrella group and leading voice for advancing collaborative landscape conservation. We strive to connect people to ideas and innovations and to each other. And the network is really a community as much as an organization, a community that's really connected by the shared work of collaborative landscape scale conservation. So a brief bio of some of our amazing speakers here today. We have Galeo Saintz, who's the international trail expert and conservationist and founding chair of the World Trails Network from 2012 to 2022. We have Katie Allen here, the director of landscape conservation from the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. And then we have David Lillard, the executive director of the Catoctin Land Trust. So with that, just a couple logistics. When you're listening to the presenters, please submit your questions in the chat and Q&A, whichever you prefer. I will try to keep track of as many as I can. And then once the presenters are done, we'll be using the remaining 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how we go with presentations, for question and answer. And if we don't get to all of them, that's okay. We're happy to do any follow-up. So thank you all for joining us. And with that, I'll hand it off to Galeo and I'll get his slides going.
Well, greetings, everyone. It is my distinct pleasure to be joining you this afternoon. I am zooming in from the very southern tip of Africa, and it's a great privilege to be part of this panel. So thank you very much for the invitation. So let's dive straight in. I think this evening or this afternoon, we are addressing a really urgent topic of ecological corridors and trails, and specifically in a time of potential increase in climate dynamics and the ever-expanding development, be it due to agriculture or urbanization across our landscapes. Kat, let's switch slides there. And so just a little bit about me. For 20 years, I've been involved in founding two of South Africa's longest biodiversity corridors in my home country here. And so co-founder of, and also in both of them, co-founder of two of our longest hiking experiences and initiatives. And so it was really from the trail side that I came to corridors, and then from the corridor side that I came to trails. And so it's a beautiful mix in my own biography. Kat, let's look at the next slide. Biodiversity loss is an escalating crisis. Landscape fragmentation due to housing development, increased infrastructure development, fragmentation creep. We know all about it. Everyone on this call is familiar with it. And the other thing, in addition to that, is people are becoming increasingly less connected to nature, and in particular, the reality of living with wild nature. Think predators. In the Northern Hemisphere, think wolves. In Africa, lions and crocodiles and elephants. And the human-wildlife conflict is something we need to think more about, I believe, in relation to trails and corridors, and or increasing or rewilding of existing trail landscapes. Let's look at the next slide, Kat. So we've got habitat loss is linked to resource needs for a growing planetary population and exceeding planetary boundaries, as this WWF slide so aptly portrays, is one of our challenges. And at the core of that is both climate change, biodiversity loss, and biochemical flow, which for me is one that we don't speak enough about. Next. Connecting people with landscape is, one of the challenges that we face in, connecting humans to nature. And it's dependent on a number of things. There's our modern lifestyles. It's also just access to what I call really wild nature. So it's easy in many instances to go on a trail or get out your backyard and be in a park-like environment. But that's very different to being in a wilderness environment, where we have more wild encounters with species. And the carrying capacity, it's one thing to have connection with nature through trails, as you can see in this image I'm showing here, which is from from South Korea, actually. And, great, we're getting outdoors, but when you're in crowds like that, there's no way to really connect with nature in any meaningful way. And then, of course, the question of equitable access to nature. One of the things that really struck me recently, I'm one of the members of the steering committee for one of the IUCN's commissions. And in one of our calls recently online, the facilitator, as an icebreaker, said to everyone on the call, now this is a team of global conservationists, share with us briefly how you connect with nature. And immediately my ears pricked up. And as I was listening to everyone sharing their experience of connecting with nature, it went like this. Well, when I take my dog for a walk, when I go on the trail with my child, when I'm trail running, when I'm on my mountain bike in the forest on a trail, every single one of them was referring to their experience of connecting to nature, connected to being on a trail. And I found that fascinating. I expected people who are hardcore conservationists to have a deeper ecological kind of response to that question. But what it highlighted for me was that even trails are a critical tool for conservationists to connect with nature. Next, please, Kat. We're all familiar with this kind of image, and it's your classic corridors set up here. You've got this fragmented landscape, you've got that fragmented island in the middle, and we can immediately see where the corridors are. They're either running along the ridge lines or they're running along the riparian zones. And it's generally spaces where tractors, plows, and farming equipment can't really get to. And the leftover becomes a kind of corridor. And this is, in a way, the tragedy of our time, but it's also the challenge of our time and the excitement of, why landscape connectivity is so very important. Next slide, please. The question we can ask is, what is the role that trails can play within ecological corridors? And I want us to imagine, what would some of our landscapes look like? The previous slide, how would that landscape change with restoration, with the increase in connectivity across farmland in particular, with increase of connectivity across roadscapes, which tend to break up and fragment our landscapes much more than we realize. I was in, I've got firsthand experience of the role that corridors play in species movement. In 2014, I was part of an expedition that actually traveled 1,200 miles across Oregon and into Northern California. And what we were doing was retracing the route of a lone wolf that had left his pack. And this is a fairly famous wolf in the United States, Wolf OR7. And we did an expedition to raise awareness for human-wildlife conflict in the towns and farmscapes of Oregon and into Northern California, because one wolf, of course, soon becomes a pack of wolves, and that changes everyone's relationship to what one thinks of wolves. And what we found was, looking one day, I was sitting in a small little town called Brothers in Central Oregon, and we were looking at our map of where we were heading, and it suddenly popped out to me, the route that we were following of this wolf's GPS collar. That wolf had taken the ultimate perfect line through the landscape following intact corridors. But these were not official corridors. These were simply vegetation corridors on the edges of farms or ranches, and then, of course, down the Cascade Range. And there were sections where he spent a lot of time on the Pacific Crest Trail. And it astonished me because this wolf never had the privilege that we have of taking a bird's eye view, of a map and seeing, oh, there's connected landscape, I'm going to follow that little thing, or, oh, there's a trail, I'm going to take that line all the way down, I know I'm going to be safe. He was simply following his nose, essentially, and following intact, connected biomes. So for me, I love this picture, and it was such a pivotal moment for me in my own life of really understanding the connection between corridors, movement of species, the ability to move across a landscape, and the role that trails play. Let's have a look at the next one, Kat. So I'm going to talk briefly about 3 examples from around the world. I've had the great privilege to travel to nearly all of these places. I haven't been to Brazil yet, but certainly I've been to Australia, and then South Africa, of course, is where I'm based. So we're looking at 3 case studies. Next, Kat, we're going to start off with Brazil and the Atlantic Forest Initiative, which is a 4,000-kilometer long trail along the Atlantic coast of Brazil. And this trail passes through 5 different Brazilian states, over 70 different public and private protected areas. And the main objective of this initiative is to reconcile conservation and development in the region. And their mission states quite clearly is to engage society in the conservation and recovery of the Atlantic forest through outdoor activities and the connection of natural areas. And at the same time, promoting socioeconomic development and appreciation of the natural and cultural heritage. One of the primary motivations for the development of this initiative was Brazil had a program of sort of exclusion from their protected areas. They believed that to protect the areas, you need to keep people out. And what they found then some 10 years ago was nobody really cared for biodiversity or the preservation of nature, because a whole generation had grown up without connection to conservation action. And so this was a trail product or project that was heavily funded and supported by WWF, a purely conservation organization. And what we see with this project is that the planning and connectivity studies have involved a 10-kilometer buffer either side of the trail. And this stretches across rural areas and continuous sections of forest corridor, but also into sort of more urban spaces, because the trail actually connects through 2 of the biggest populated cities of the country. And the studies that they've done indicate that priority areas for restoration since 2021 were critical. And they've been, as a result of this project, getting much more engagement from sponsors, from volunteers, to actually do restoration of forest, which is quite exciting. We mustn't forget that you can change the slide for me, please. That the Atlantic forest, here's a picture of a map of it. The green is the Atlantic forest biome, and then the yellow is the mountains. But the fragmentation of this biome is significant. Only 11.7% of the Atlantic forest actually remains intact. So they've lost nearly 87% of the biome over the last centuries, and it's quite a tragedy for me when I read that statistic. And one of the other things that this particular corridor does, or what the trail does, is it follows the mountain ridges through the area. And for me, that raises some concerns, because essentially you've got species migrating to some of those mountaintops, especially seeking refuge in times of climate change. And now we put a trail right across the top. So I think this raises for me one of those questions of how careful we need to be and how critical it is for trail managers to really increase their sense of responsibility towards the ecology of place and the ecology and functionality of the corridor that the trail is moving through. Let's look at the next slide, Kat. So it's just an example of the forest, and maybe the next one. And at the core of the next slide, Kat. Yeah, at the core of this initiative was really connecting people to nature and looking at the results that they've had. It's been a really exciting and powerful campaign that WWF's championed in Brazil. Our next case study is going to be from South Africa. It's called the Eden to Addo Corridor Initiative. And this is a fascinating initiative. I was one of the co-founders of this. It's a 400-kilometer long corridor. And what's different about this corridor compared to the other 2 that I'm sharing is this corridor, you can see, I can't show you on the screen, but this corridor goes from left to right across the screen. And it essentially crosses 7 different mountain ranges, whereas a lot of the other corridors go along the range and sort of follow the range as a corridor. So Eden to Addo in a way is connecting mountain ranges across valleys, which is where the challenge is, because those valleys, of course, are heavily farmed with agriculture. This particular initiative is connecting the last free-roaming, unfenced elephant in Southern Africa with its closest kin, some 400 kilometers away in the east, the Addo Elephant National Park, where there's a herd now of a couple of thousand elephant that were sort of reclaimed from a handful of about 25 individuals some 30, 40 years ago. So a huge conservation success. But those elephants in Addo are hamstrung in the park that they're in, and elephants by nature need to move. Eden to Addo, we found very quickly in the early days, as soon as we knocked on a farmer's or landowner's door and wanted to talk conservation, the door was closed in our face in general. If we knocked on that same door 6 months later and talked about a trail coming through their property, oh yeah, that's a great idea, guys. We're happy to support that. And this is how we used a trail as a tool for building relationship in the landscape, and it's been very effective. Not only that, we used the trail as a fundraising mechanism, and this has given the corridor, the conservation initiative, independent funding, allowing it without needing to rely on donors or grants to actually get on with the work that's necessary on the ground. Let's switch to the next slide, Kat. These are our primary trail builders, and these are our corridor champions. Elephants across Africa are notorious for creating corridors, for having very intact corridors themselves that they follow for migration purposes and other reasons, and expanding their territory. But they also build trails. They bring down trees. They make pathways for other mammals to actually follow. Next. And this is a picture of the Eden to Addo landscape to give you some idea. Let's go to the next one. We're going to look now briefly at Australia. And the corridors in Australia, one can see are, I mean, first of all, Australia is a massive continent. And on both the southern coast and the eastern coast, they've got immense landscape-wide initiatives. And all of these initiatives have at some form trails crossing them or moving through them. Next, please. We're going to focus very briefly on the Bibbulmun track in southwestern Australia. And if you can zoom in on your screen, you can see a little bit there how many roads this particular trail crosses. And this has raised for me a particular question around whether trails actually conduit movement of wildlife to road crossings, and something that we need to be really cautious of. But what's beautiful about the Bibbulmun track here is this is a trail living across conservation areas. And in the far south of this track, there's an initiative called the Gondwana Link, which is a corridor initiative connecting landscapes and reconnecting fragmented landscape. But one of the unique things that they're doing is they are as well doing very much similar to what we did at Eden to Addo, is using a trail as a tool for connecting with people across the landscape and making connection between landowners. But they're focusing not only on the ecological corridor, but on what they call cultural corridors and the concepts of country. I don't know how many of us on this call are familiar with the concepts that the Australians have around the notion of country. They speak of the notion country to mean a holistic and spiritual connection to the land, to the waters, to the living beings within a specific area. And it encompasses the physical and metaphysical aspects of the environment. And this Gondwana Link initiative I find particularly fascinating in that they're collecting stories of place and reconnecting the land, especially working with indigenous people. And so building a corridor that lives in another space beyond just the biodiversity side of things. Next, please, Cap. And I'm aware I'm running a little bit over my time, so if we can skip through, I think, the next few slides. One of the things the Bibbulmun track has identified is that it's really critical for any changes in corridor or any new sections of trail to really go through an 8-step trail development process and assess the impact on environment and cultural values. That's a really core thing. Next slide. And that's an example of the cultural corridors, which I think is really beautiful, the way they've integrated art there. We can go to the next one, Kat. So quickly summing up, the importance of ecological corridors are, I think, undisputed. And all of these initiatives that I've used as examples for you, all of them attest to the value of working with trails and corridors simultaneously and the values that each bring to the other. And that, yes, there are things we should maybe pay attention to be more consciously aware. But I think the critical take home is that trails can bring value to conservation projects, and conservation scientists can bring value to trails. And moving forward with that, I think, is the way we're going to find the role that the more of us that are engaged in broad landscape-wide initiatives, whether it's trails and conservation and communities and culture, the more successful we're going to be in the end for the conservation of our ecological systems. So I'll leave it at that.
Great. Thank you so much, Galeo. That was a great presentation. With that, I'll hand it off to Katie Allen to start her screen. Great.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to the Network for Landscape Conservation for having us today. And I think just setting the stage so well. Thank you, Galeo, for that, putting us into the global context of trails as corridors. Hi, my name is Katie Allen. I'm the Director of Landscape Conservation for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and I'm here to talk with a case study really of a deeper dive into our efforts with our partners to build an enduring Appalachian climate corridor and what that means. But I want to also pull out some of those themes that I heard from that presentation, just hearing that, you know, the trails as a tool for climate action, and really that there's this diverse community of partners that are found in the trail community, and a community practice among long distance trails to think about this and the evolving synergies that this has with the community of landscape conservation and that practice of landscape conservation. And I hope and see how this work evolves with the Appalachian Trail, and if we can find ourselves as a model with as something that was said about increasing the responsibility beyond the footpath, and what does that look like, and what does that mean in partnership, and how can conservancies like the Appalachian Trail or our other leaders of trails in the U.S. can find themselves in that role. And then that other piece that I'll speak to about that connection to nature, and where, you know, how can we really leverage that in the work around landscape scale conservation. So to dive in a little bit, I wanted to start to set the stage with a little bit of context of the Appalachian Trail and the Appalachian Trail Conservancy mission and vision. Over 100 years ago, Benton MacKay, the visionary behind the Appalachian Trail, said, "A realm and not merely a trail marks the full aims of our efforts." In his proposal for the trail in 1921, it was a vision for the Appalachian Trail to offer much more than just recreation, but recuperation, for enjoyment, sense of life, sense of purpose, knowing full well that it was the realm that was the most critical to the efforts of building the Appalachian Trail. The footpath itself is simply the means to experience it. Looking forward, you know, with that vision held in our minds, MacKay understood, after seeing firsthand the rapid expansion of industrialization on the East Coast during the early 19th century, as well as the devastation of the First World War globally, and what that did to us all sort of mentally and physically, and the global pandemic of 1918, kind of interesting correlations to where we are today. And he, you know, recognizing fully that a 2,000-mile footpath alone would not be enough. In order to preserve the trail for future generations, a realm, a forest of forests, clean water, and other sources of life surrounding the Appalachian Trail must be established, nurtured, and protected. So looking back at those themes, it's interesting to draw parallels as we continue to move forward. Today, the modern hiker can take a trip on the trail and walk 1 mile or up to over 2,000 miles on a connected linear path from Georgia to Maine. Deemed the National Scenic Trail in 1965 in the National Trails Act, the collaboration that it took to build the trail still lives on with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and our cooperative management structure of the trail, which includes the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, 14 state partners, 31 trail maintaining clubs, and thousands of volunteers and their hours to helping this trail continue to exist on our landscape. So trail itself, you know, as an organization has been the trail has been a backbone for our organization for almost 100 years. And we continue to ask ourselves, have we been successful to realize this vision? For 100 years, the Appalachian Trail has built a reputation as an iconic destination and a model across across the globe for long distance trail building and management. And as such, we've seen this inspiration and wanderlust among folks to tackle the trail only increase over years. As the People's Trail, we see 3 to 4 million visitors each year find ways to unplug and get on the trail. And in doing so, we see the rippling effect that this connection to nature and physical activity can add up to as it is related to the outdoor recreation economy. But again, we ask ourselves, have we realized the vision for the trail for that realm? And I'd say the shortest of answers to that question is no, not really. We haven't realized the complete vision. The pattern in the realm demonstrates loudly the need for efforts beyond the trail's footpath. This map shows how migration patterns are changing in the face of climate change, and species are already migrating north using the Appalachian Mountains. And I think this harkens to that rewilding in this area and how interesting it's already evolving and how it's demonstrating to us in this changing climate. For me, the star on this map is my home in West Virginia. A quick trip to the trail and I can take an on-ramp to this mega highway of nature, much less like maybe that lone wolf OR7 in Oregon, and I am in the throes of a climate corridor. So much more than a footpath, the Appalachian Trail set in this important corridor becomes the backbone of the journey of plants and animals adapting to climate change and landscape in a very constricted and developed East Coast context. The dynamic forces, of course, have been at play for millions of years in the Appalachians, which have created one of the world's most resilient, diverse, and carbon-rich landscapes. Often overlooked until now, the Appalachian landscape is one of global significance with a lot at stake. So the green blob map there surrounding the trail is the result of research and investigation done by the Nature Conservancy to identify the most climate resilient lands necessary for ecological adaptation and mitigation. Our efforts are not to focus on the causes, but to focus on the solutions that our work will not only help ensure the long-term protection and the experience of using the Appalachian Trail, but also assist in mitigating the effects of climate change throughout the Appalachian region and beyond. With this huge issue of climate change and the big idea to look at the realm as a corridor, for climate mitigation and adaptation, we did what we knew we do well, serve as a role as a convener. We convened a group of partners, climate science experts, and conservation practitioners to serve as advisors to us to build a vision and the goals of what a climate corridor could be and could inspire to become. Over a facilitated process by our partners at the Center for Large Landscape Conservation, we developed a vision to ensure an intact and enduring Appalachian landscape and inspire broad community action to secure the sources of life and sustain life itself as the climate changes. We saw two goals emerge, one related to the science of biology and ecosystems, the well-studied needs for ecological integrity, and two, the more ambiguous and more ambitious need to define, grow, catalyze, and galvanize the human connection to nature to coordinate and implement those actions. In many ways, this list of values are already in action across various organizations, projects, and initiatives in our geography. However, in our landscape, there's no singular voice celebrating those efforts in concert to really demonstrate the collective impact that could be occurring on our landscape. As a result of all of our efforts within the advisory group was ultimately this report. The culmination of discussions to design and implement a climate corridor is really a call to action and call to inspire more folks to engage in conservation. Top level recommendations boil down to recognition of the need to build the partnership and coalitions that can lead landscape scale conservation planning and facilitate collaborative work. So overall, with the discussion of nature-based solutions in a changing climate, ATC is really in a feasibility and investigation mode. We know the backbone geography of the Appalachian Trail landscape has about 32% of its lands already protected, but when you look to this much larger corridor for climate resiliency, only 26% is protected and provides a much greater opportunity to conserve more and again, find the greatest returns on that investment. So it's a lot of homework we're doing and looking for those areas of most critical investment and building coalitions to support and advocate for the Appalachians and nature-based solutions to climate change. At Appalachian Trail Conservancy, we're taking the report and the recommendations to heart and taking stock at what we're already doing to support. And I just wanted to touch on a few of those examples, just kind of paint a picture of what's happened across the landscape. We have looked at the trail and trail priorities to protect permanent conservation that promote vulnerable areas, not just for trail management, but for the larger corridor. And our partners also see the value in doing so. And we continue to see conservation partners working to connect and protect the landscape. And here's just a few examples of that work that's from the last couple of years, but there's many more examples to show. And we work with partners across the trail landscape through our stewardship efforts to maintain functional ecosystems and protect biodiversity through projects like aquatic habitat restoration, invasive species management, and habitat restoration for endangered or threatened plants and animals. And just one example of that is our work with the Appalachian Mountain Club to restore Atlantic salmon spawning habitat, where over 96 miles of stream have been improved to allow salmon to return to their headwaters of the Pleasant River watershed for the first time in nearly 2 centuries. And then connecting to that theme of stewardship, another value is nature-based solutions. And this is a buzzy phrase and totally recognize that, but essentially defined as actions to protect sustainably manage and restore natural and modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, simultaneously benefiting both people and nature. So, for example, we know that the protection of forests around drinking water supplies can keep forests intact, as well as serving as a filter for rainwater and runoff and support clean water supplies. We know that the Appalachian Trail corridor provides the headwaters, tributaries, and streams for over 119 million people. So conservation financing of state water infrastructure could play a major part in nature-based solutions to adapting to climate change, while also supporting these ecosystems through protection and ultimately safeguarding those supplies of water. Moving into kind of those values around the human connection to nature, we do want to recognize the coalition building that needs to take at scale. And currently ATC does convene the Appalachian Trail Landscape Partnership with the National Park Service, the largest conservation collaborative on the East Coast, sort of by largest across jurisdictions, and brings together hundreds of conservation organizations working at multiple scales throughout the Appalachian Trail landscape to build capacity for conservation and work to connect and protect natural resources of the landscape surrounding the trail. And that the final value of the report in connecting humans to nature is thriving communities, and how we can connect thriving to climate action, and what does that mean and look like. Also, at the ATC, we are continuing to look for ways to grow and evolve our own network of designated Appalachian Trail communities. So a program that supports thriving downtowns that also could promote climate and conservation action. The program itself has a ton of intersectional and interdisciplinary opportunity. We're looking to build that. I'll just say that I learned today a climate analysis was just released by the Collective of Community Development Financial Assistance Institutions by Impact Appalachia, which brings focus to the Central Appalachians to become a climate haven. Interesting kind of new evolution. So we recognize that to become climate haven and receive all these the influx of folks, that we're going to need affordable housing, community health, and economic development to be welcome and provide a prosperity opportunity for these communities that might see an influx of newcomers. And climate havens at both in our region could avoid the worst effects of climate change, but would only be successful if we have the infrastructure in place to be able to welcome that. It's kind of an interesting dynamic, and are we at the forefront of something, and something we definitely want to continue to see if we can explore. And so just kind of summary, just to say that, we do recognize the trail itself has its own iconic values, but the efforts of the Climate Advisory Group and subsequent report have brought greater focus into our next century efforts. And so I can leave it there and come back to some of the recommendations, turn it over to David, which I'm so excited to see how a local regional effort within our landscape is taking on a lot of the work that we've been talking about through both of these examples.
Thanks so much, Katie. David's will be able to share his screen now and really appreciate it. A ton of questions are coming in. So Galeo and Katie, if you guys want to try and answer anything, we may not get to all, but I want to make sure David has time to get through his presentation as well. David, you're mute. You are on mute. Apologies.
I think that was the problem. Thank you.
And we cannot see your screen. So if you want to share.
Yeah, I had to unshare so that I could unmute. So
Gotcha.
here we go. Hey, great to be here. Thanks everyone for joining in, and Kat, thanks for hosting this. I'm David Lillard. I'm Executive Director of Catoctin Land Trust, and I coordinate a group called the Heart of Maryland Conservation Alliance. And as you can see, we will see in a map, the AT is the spine of our two-county operation area of Washington County and Frederick County in Maryland. And we're working together for climate resilience, watershed protection, and we've adopted the idea of a connected, enduring Appalachian mountain landscape. It's convened by Catoctin Land Trust, and as of this summer, a local organization called Frederick Green is helping us convene. With help from the Catalyst Fund and Appalachian Trail Conservancy's Wild East Grant, we were launched in 2020. Spent the first year and a half or so prioritizing and looking at land conservation activities and priorities. And then in 2021, we formed a stewardship work group, which is tree planters, tree agencies, folks that do restoration work, to begin identifying opportunities to work together to do that kind of work. As you can see, we have watershed partners, we have the State Forestry Agency, we have the Climate Change Working Group of Frederick County, which is kind of a think tank that writes about connectivity, wildlife corridors. We have stormwater offices, really an interesting and diverse group of folks that are part of the partnership. We don't lack for talent, that's for sure. What we haven't had is a vision that we could all rally around to get going on. So we looked at our priority areas. You can see the Catoctin Mountains. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened there. Are you still seeing my screen? Okay, thank you.
So David, I got your presentation. We couldn't see your screen, but just tell me next if this is the right presentation.
You couldn't see my presentation on the screen?
Yeah, but I think I have it. So
okay. Go next. And I'm going to just mirror it on mine. Now, gosh, I apologize. I don't know what happened. I'm in a hotel. I can't do anything about it. Okay, so I'll walk us through, and Kat, when we catch up with the slides, I'll just ask you to move forward, okay?
sounds good.
And let me just see if I can still move here, move my own. Yeah, okay, we're gonna be fine. Just give me just about 30 seconds to regroup here. So we decided to take a watershed group approach to preserving and restoring this connected landscape. We have 3 primary watersheds. There's a really cool map to show you about it. The Catoctin, Monocacy, and Antietam watersheds. They're all tributaries of the Potomac River, the nation's river. We're about 60 miles upstream from the nation's capital. And so we decide, I don't know what's going on right now. Are you in control, Kat?
Yes, I just wanted to show the map. Apologies.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so we're teaming up on this. Okay, so we were really fishing around at the local level to say, you know, what is the glue that's going to hold this thing together? Because we're working on climate change. We've got people who are interested in the AT. We've got farm community. We've got the watershed groups, and we're like, how do we bring all of this stuff together? And so what we have is and you can go to the next one. I don't know if you probably don't have this slide. You're going backwards, I think, but that's okay. We adopted pretty much hook, line, and sinker the conserving an intact an enduring Appalachian mountain landscape, because it fit our desire to maintain landscape connectivity, to maintain biodiversity. That's really important for some of our partners. That's what they work on. Natural climate solutions is what other partners work on. So as you can see, the theme here is the report from the climate team really provided us the glue that we needed. And we are a coalition, so we're working to build coalitions and support thriving communities. So if you can go to the slide that begins with research collaborative planning process. Okay, thank you. So the first thing we need to do, even though we are a regional conservation partnership and we've been functioning for a few years, we're pretty small, we're teeny weeny. And we also know that there are other successful things going on in the world. So our first step is going to do a deep dive and look at some other collaboratives in our region, working along the Appalachian corridor and in other places around the country and around the world, just to find best practices, because it's not a one size fits all. The thing I like to say about regional conservation partnerships, they're a lot like snowflakes. No two are exactly the same, but they hold a lot of things in common. Next one. So, and then we're going to do, because we have 20 something partners and it seems to grow about every couple of months, we're going to go through a pretty deep process of interviews with our partners to find out what brings them to the partnership, what it is that they're trying to achieve, their aspirations, what's their capacity, where they see that interconnection with the partnership, because a partnership is not everybody doing the same thing, but finding things to do together, finding those common goals. So that's going to be a big part of our work just in the next couple of months. Okay, Kat. One of the things we found we do well together, we've been doing the last couple of years, is joint landowner outreach, right? Anyone who does work to conserve land or does work to restore streams, plant trees, you gotta have, you need your places to work. And it's an exhausting undertaking to create those opportunities. So we're collaborating on those. We'll do events in a farmer's barn. Everybody who's available and wants to participate can come. Our job is to convene it, and then each partner describes what they're doing, and we get projects. They hook up with someone who, there's a program in Frederick County where they pay money for streamside easements for tree plantings. And of course, there's our agricultural easement programs. There's donated easement programs. So it's our opportunity to do something together in these targeted watersheds to create opportunities to conserve land and to restore habitat. Okay, Kat. So as we begin to reap the benefits of this outreach that we're going to be doing together over the next year, we're going to have site opportunities are going to arise. And then each of our partners are also out doing their work, and they're going to have opportunities to arrive. So we're going to get together and visit the sites as a team. It's going to be a strong learning process for each of us to really get down on the ground and in the water with each of the partners to find out what they do and to begin to evaluate the projects in terms of their benefits for landscape connectivity, habitat, and because we're in the Chesapeake Bay drainage, helping to meet the goals of the Chesapeake Bay. All right, Kat. So the other thing we're going to do is prioritize with the help from our grants from the Catalyst Fund and Wild East and a few others. We developed some custom tools, riparian opportunity areas, that overlays with some of the Maryland GIS mapping system to look at the landscape parcel by parcel, see which ones are conserved, which is a great place to start looking for restoration opportunities, see where the opportunities are, and then begin, then we have a big selection list. Kat. Of course, none of this can happen in a vacuum, and just because we have a bunch of great partners doesn't mean we're hearing from everyone. So we have been doing over the last 2 years, and now we're going to really do this much more intentionally, is to hear from everyone, hear from underserved communities, hear from well-served communities, and hear just how people connect with the land. And I think we're going to find some of the things that Galeo was talking about. A lot of it is the AT, but there are a lot of people who love South Mountain, love this landscape, that really the AT is something they know is up there, but that's not their connection. So we want to find how people connect with the landscape and how they would like to connect with taking care of it. And so, yes, thank you, Kat. This is a watershed approach. Our long-term vision is that we will have a connected, healthy landscape when we can take care of these watersheds. And there has been so much good going on in this region, really heroic work by all of our partners for decades, but these streams are still not in good shape. They need a lot of help. And so we believe strongly that by bringing all of us together with a shared vision, that we're going to restore these streams and protect that land, we'll have what we need to create a strategic plan for the watersheds. The strategic plan for our partnership will be our plan for restoring these watersheds and the connectivity of the Appalachian Mountains. And we're just so happy to get going. You can go to the next slide there, Kat. This is a great view. This is one of my favorite ones from the AT in Maryland. That's looking up at Greenbrier Lake. We have the C&O Canal. We've got the AT. We've got Catoctin Mountain Park. We've got national battlefields, incredible local forests and state parks. So we've got assets that we could begin to connect and expand through easements and through fee purchases, the already existing public lands, to create even greater connectivity. And that's what's giving us a greater sense of purpose. We're really excited to keep rolling on it. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thanks so much, David, and apologies all for the technical issues, but hopefully we caught up with you. We have a ton of questions coming in, and I know we won't get to all of them, but I'll start back with Galeo. In the US, sometimes there's I think you can see that in the chat, Galeo, but the first question in the Q&A, sometimes just to repeat to everybody, there's a reflexive resistance to trails. Was there a particular incentive that landowners in Africa felt they would have by having a trail run through their property?
Well, this is really, really an interesting question. And I would say it's got to do with culture. At the end of the day, some people just have a particular perception of conservation, of people trying to force, landowners to do certain things with their land, put it under easement, whatever the story might be. And when you were talking about a product that was more ecotourism orientated, where they saw some potential revenue through a trail, they were much more open. So we found that over the years, the trails it resonates with different people for different reasons. And I think really at the end of the day is, if you're not winning by knocking on the door, speaking easements and conservation and trying to bring land under protection, find another way is basically, I think, the learning from that.
That's great. Thank you. And I want to also go to Katie. I'm going to go around a little bit to get everyone's points. But Katie, thinking about the role that you see for other trails in the Appalachian Quarter landscape, the AT is a heavy hitter, but in many parts of the larger landscape, there's a ton of state and local trails that are prominent.
Yeah, absolutely. And that we do see that getting to that realm vision, that those, not even the intersection trails, but parallel trails and trails in our region do, come back to that responsibility amplification that those that manage those trails could be part of this greater conversation. And through our Appalachian Trail Landscape Partnership, we invite those trail managers to participate. So we have folks in New Jersey, New York, Long Trail, and others that we, I don't think we've done a great job yet of a community practice in the US with all trails having this evolution of synergies, but in our region for sure, trying to activate and catalyze those conversations for those that participate in our landscape partnership.
That's great. Thank you. And Thinking just a combination for Katie and Galeo and David, if you want to talk to this about the negative impacts of recreational activities on wildlife movement. How can you balance the benefits of a trail with the side effects potentially of impacting on wildlife? And are there some examples? I'm thinking, Galeo, some international examples of how folks are trying to balance that in the intention of those trails for biological diversity and in addition recreation.
Sure, it's a tough question because to be really honest, I haven't really seen any trails proactively trying to mitigate that. You know, what first comes in mind for trails is really the preservation of the trail per se. And so carrying capacity is, of course, one of the biggest issues that we do face. And we've seen that with COVID, how numbers have increased in many places. I would say that, you know, the best way to mitigate issues with wildlife is to start building deeper relationship with place. And this is where volunteers are really critical, where your trail crews are really critical, is educating them that part of being on a trail, and especially when that trail is in a corridor, is not just about the trail itself. It's not about the build of the trail. It's not about the facilities and all of that. It's more about how is that trail lying on the land and how is it a conduit for movement for species in the area. And we all know that multiple different mammals use trails. They're just like us. You come across a trail, you're going to take a trail because it's the easiest way to move through that landscape. And as someone who loves wildlife tracking, the amount of tracks that you see on trails is phenomenal if your eyes are open. And so I think really mitigating issues is about being more conscious and aware as managers, both from the trail side and from the conservation side, and really getting an understanding of who lives in that landscape on either side of the trail. Who are the actual species there? You know, and that's the starting point in my view. And working with the science, you know, really working with more science.
I was going to say, Katie or David, any other thoughts on that from your different scales, from the international to continental and local scale?
I think I echo everything that was just said. I think it is, you know, we're not saying the trails as corridors is a silver bullet to all of this. That is one of the main, you know, I think issues that we do have to find the science and continue to have these discussions. We find, you know, I think for us, we see the trail management and our work around in that small corridor of our management area around invasive species. We know that hiker is the person that's probably the most at fault for moving that invasive species on up and down the trail. But this broader landscape, we'd love to see a braided landscape that's much wider than the trail management corridor, and see that multiple benefit opportunities happen beyond the footpath. And I think it's for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, along with the National Park Service and our other land management agencies, to understand the context of how our management areas can effectively help support the management of those braided areas, and see where ecological benefits and migration patterns can be elevated and supported as they find their way through this kind of conservation patchwork. And in the East Coast, we have so much development and land conversion that it just makes it even more fun to try and find those pathways and to think of it at that scale.
Yeah, you know, in the AT corridor in Maryland, there are parts of it that are only 1,000 feet wide. And so even though as a unit of the national park system, they have to have a plan for biodiversity. It's really, for us locally, it's about, as Katie said, making that corridor even wider and affecting the land management plans in that wider corridor. And that's really the only way to go about it. And of course, educating humans.
That's a great point. Thank you. And I think there was a lot of comments about how do we engage the communities. And I think, David, you provided a lot of great examples of listening sessions, other ways and approaches at that local scale for that education component and figuring out how they are connected to this landscape, which I think we heard throughout all of your presentations. A little bit of a easier question, but is there a website or organization that lists all the ongoing corridor connectivity projects worldwide? And I think, Galeo, if you want to take a first stab at that.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. I think Conservation Corridor is a group in the United States that does a fair amount of that. The IUCN would also be a resource. But even in my own country, we're struggling to find exactly which initiatives are happening where and what, and so it's, yeah, get on the ground is probably the best answer.
Yes, and I'm sorry that I can't remember the name of the newsletter, even though I get it. But if you do a search on Conservation Corridor, there's a group, as Galeo just mentioned, and it's a terrific learning resource.
And I'll see if I can find it and pop it in the chat. Other questions, Galeo, or other panelists, if you guys are seeing questions that you would like to ask, please don't be shy. I think we have some great ones here. And I may have been missing them.
I did respond to one that's appeared twice, which is the role of Indigenous communities. And
great.
I'd love to share that there. We've seen in Australia really a powerful initiative in Australia where the state governments are spending large sums of money in developing trails specifically through Indigenous territory, and essentially handing the management and benefits of those trails over to those communities. And this is playing a powerful role in building relationships between previously disadvantaged or previously alienated communities in that country, and bringing them into a meaningful engagement, both with landscape restoration, landscape management, and also the ecotourism side of things. So actually, I think very exciting projects can be undertaken with Indigenous communities across the world.
That's great. And any other additional comments from Katie or David on efforts or organizations that are engaged in the space and are kind of getting interested in this work?
I mean, yeah, our partnership has set that intention in our strategic plan. We do want to build authentic relationships and centered in the landscape, and ensuring that together we're finding the ways that best steward this landscape. And so I think more to come on that, which is very exciting in building those relationships.
That's great. And we do have about 1 more minute. So other questions that you guys are seeing, and just a reminder, if we don't get to your question, I will provide these to the speakers and the information that I have, so they can get back to you. But any other last minute comments, Galeo, Katie, and David? I think amazing perspectives from across the globe, but other last minute thoughts before we start to wrap up.
Just for me, I saw one question about crossings, wildlife crossings, and yeah, that's one of the worst human impacts, intersections with wildlife. We are going to participate in a green infrastructure planning process starting in Frederick County, and that includes some of the really cool emerging technologies for wildlife crossings, even over interstates. A lot of it is very expensive, but we have to do this right.
That's a great point. And there are tons of resources. The Wildlife Corridor pilot program that funding has been provided through the federal government. There's a lot of different resources. So if people have questions on those specifically, there is a lot of funding for wildlife crossings across at least the United States. Galeo, I'm uncertain if there's opportunities internationally, but I expect there may be some.
Yeah, and maybe to wrap up from my side, the last slide I would have had on my presentation was one. I did my master's degree on conservation corridors, and I was interviewing a landowner the one day, and she turned to me and said, she sort of finally got it, what this corridor idea was about. And she said, actually, I think it's the joy of relationship. That joy of relationship is the corridor. And whether that's at a human level, whether it's at an ecological level, the capacity to stay connected, to move, to be free in the environment, that is essentially what these corridors are. And I think we live in a time which is really exciting, both for trails and conservation agencies and conservation initiatives, in that, I think Thoreau said, salvation of the world is in wildness. And I think, looking at where we sit in the world, the salvation of the world is in connectivity and restoration. And trails have a critical and vital role to play in that, I believe. And corridor initiatives, well, they're just where it's at, in my view. It's not easy. It's difficult work. You need a lot of money. It's not sexy, but it's actually the space where relationships can come alive. And I think that's where the salvation is, having relationships.
Galeo, that's a great end, but Katie, I'll open it up if you have other thoughts. Okay, Katie's like, no, that was perfect. Well, we are essentially at the end. I just wanted to thank you, Galeo, Katie, David. This was a wonderful discussion, and I know we have a ton of questions we didn't get to. So I hope that this gives you space to continue these conversations. I know the speakers would love for having more conversation around this topic. A lot to think about, but we have reached the top of the hour, so thank you all for participating. As I mentioned, the webinar is part of the ongoing Landscape Conservation in Action webinar series. A recording of this webinar will be available in a couple days on our website, and I posted the website in the chat for those who can have a quick access. We do have upcoming webinars throughout the summer, and so more information will be provided on that website if you guys are curious. So thank you, Galeo. Big round of applause to all of you, and really excited to continue the conversation. Really appreciate it. Awesome. Hope you all have a great one. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Well done, Kat. Thank you very much. And thanks, Katie, as well, for the opportunity. I really enjoyed that.
Galeo, it was great to meet you, and I'm excited to stay in touch. And Katie, thanks so much for getting David. It was great. And a lot of thank yous from everybody. So I wanted to stay on to make sure you guys saw them all.
Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Have a good one.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.